So fortunate in Albuquerque to have a visit from folks running our country in all sorts of ways with respect to climate change, health, and human services. And so it's always a tremendous honor for any mayor, and myself included, to welcome Admiral Levine and all our decision makers from DC when they come. So first, thank you for visiting the Duke City and New Mexico. We really appreciate that. I want to share just a few thoughts. Obviously, it's been an extremely busy day with respect to things related to climate change and health, with respect to our fires. And so those of you who are tuning in know that I was just with your colleagues 10 minutes ago out in the Bosque because of the fire that's happening there. Now, the Admiral's going to be able to visit, I think, the Bosque later today, which is especially timely. And so she's going to see firsthand some of the effects of climate change. But I just want to share a few brief remarks with respect to, I think, echoing and supporting the connection between equity and justice and climate change. And I know that's what the Admiral stands for, and so we're especially grateful for that vision and that push at the federal level that is going to help lift up our local efforts at the intersection between those areas. Now, one thing about climate change is I think folks here, understand what this is, but often we tend to view it as a national or a global issue. But I can't help with these fires but point out the obvious increase in forest fires even in New Mexico over the last 10 years. And there's different arguments and reasons why that is, but you can't ignore the fact that some of it has to do with temperature, and some of it has to do with indirect related things to temperature, like the amount of rainfall we get, the amount of snowpack we get. And just to drive it home for folks, when I was a kid, Sandia Ski Area was open every day during the winter. Now we're lucky to get 2 weeks, right? And we know that's, for us locals, that's the ski area on the mountain that you see outside. On a more, sort of a different note, but it's the same thing, we talk about the bark beetle. People see, why are our pinon forests dying? Because of this beetle that's eating them. That has to do with the temperature. It's because the temperatures don't get low enough, essentially, to prevent them from grabbing hold in those forests. Another one is when you drive south. I literally remember going down to Elephant Butte as a kid, and you can see the type of desert change. It switches, I think, to the Sonoran Desert. You'll have to apologize. I think that's the name of that particular type of desert. But you see the ecosystem change. And it used to change around Socorro. And I literally, when I was a kid, and I remember around, year 2000s-ish, all of a sudden it's like Berlin. And now, like, that desert is approaching the South Valley in Albuquerque. And so that vegetation, those type of plants and so forth, they're replacing what used to grow in a colder climate right up here. So we see the effects of this all around us. And lastly, I want to share, even in our urban core, when we do our heat map work that I know the government supported, and especially even your specific division, when we look at our heat islands using the heat mapping inventory that we're doing with our environmental health department that's here today, and our parks team, we see the loss of our own tree canopy, and we see temperatures that are 5-10 degrees higher in the middle of our city that were not that way before because of the loss of tree canopy. And so that obviously hits at the intersection of equity, because those tend to be our lower income, often our more historic and communities of color neighborhoods. And so, literally, it's a hotter place to live in certain areas of Albuquerque than it was before because of the connection of equity and climate change. So we're working hard to reverse that. That's why we're planning, Dave, how many trees is it?
100,000, Mayor.
100,000 trees, and we're doing it with an equity lens in those areas. And we're also looking at all our design standards in terms of whether it's medians or businesses and the requirements they have. The last story I would share, because I know New Mexicans can really relate to this. You had this big push for xeriscape, and I know it starts with an X. I always kind of mispronounce it, but we took all our grass out, and that's a good thing because the grass takes so much water. But we also took our trees out, and so for at least 10 years, massive subdivisions were built with very few trees or low shade trees, and we thought we were doing it to conserve water. We did, but we sacrificed the shade cover and the temperature aspects of trees. So I want to remind everyone, we're all in on trees. We still would prefer that you don't have that much grass. but we are all in on trees. And if anyone needs regular recommendations on which trees to plant and so forth, we have that in abundance here. So those are a couple of things I wanted to share. Let me end with this. The biggest accomplishment we've been able to do, and it's a credit to a lot of people in this room, is we partnered with some folks that might seem sort of out of the ordinary. Our Hickory Apache Nation, which is about, it might be 150 miles. It's not really that close to here, but we know them well. And we partnered with them and our utility, P&M, and oddly Silver City and some other partners. And we built a huge solar plant, basically, that powers city government. And so now, with the help of our mitigation for energy efficiency, all Kelsey's work on how we get to 100% renewable energy, as of about 2 weeks ago, we are 88% renewable as a city government. And that puts us in the top 4 in the country, and we're in a wonderful race to be number 1. And so Seattle, Cincinnati, we're coming after you. And so we're in a great place. We think we're going to be 100% renewable by 2025. So with a little bit more on that, I'm going to hand it over to the real experts who deal with this, starting back to our Sustainability Officer, Kelsey Rader. Thanks so much. Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Mayor. As Mayor explained, we have done a great amount of work in climate mitigation, but we are no longer in a place where mitigation is enough. We're clearly moving into a phase of our climate strategy where we have to aim to build Albuquerque's resilience, to build out adaptation strategies so that we can confront some of these new challenges. Rising urban heat is something that we've been feeling in Albuquerque for years. To address this issue, 1 year ago, the Sustainability Office received support from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to create the latest of a series of heat maps of our city. This particular heat map from a year ago looked at active and public transportation corridors on one of the hottest days of the year. The results of this effort showed that some of the areas where we were experiencing some of our highest heat also align with some of where our most vulnerable communities reside. Those areas can experience up to a 17-degree temperature difference during the day, with temperatures soaring over 100 degrees in the afternoon. Creating this data with our community partners, staff, and volunteers was just a first step. I am proud today to share that Albuquerque has been selected to participate in NASA's development program. The develop program is going to allow us to further our heat data by combining it with Earth observations that will build an interactive tree map to be able to model potential impacts of future tree plantings in neighborhoods and their impact in reducing temperatures. The city is also committed to long-term heat mitigation efforts beyond increasing tree canopy. Over the last few years, the city has worked to provide community partners with free energy efficiency upgrades for low-income residents. We've created new solar shade structures, and we're also exploring opportunities offered by cool pavement technology. I am extremely thankful to our federal partners for understanding that health, safety, and the economy need to be viewed through a lens of climate change. Because of support from federal partners such as Admiral Levine, I'm hopeful that our large institutions will continue to increase support for large cities like Albuquerque as we're contending with some of these catastrophic impacts of a changing climate. There is no central governance for heat now, and we need action as soon as we can get it. Now I'd like to introduce Assistant City Forester Sean O'Neill, who will explain how we are able to use some of this heat data to prioritize where and how we're expanding our tree canopy to bring shade to neighborhoods.
Thank you, Kelsey. So I'll go ahead and dig into the images that we do have. So it's interdisciplinary data usage for management decisions. It's the ability of using data that we have to make decisions on how to maintain and increase our urban canopy. So we're doing this in multiple tiers. One is using data analysis on a very science level, looking at remote sensing, geographical information systems, GIS, and tree inventory and surveying. Also while utilizing communication tools and marketing strategies, bolstering partnerships that we do have, and goal setting so that we can have a community engagement and project implementations and a really community buy-in that to increase urban canopy will take all of us, will take the city of Albuquerque as a whole. So to first dig on the science side, this is the heat mapping data that Environmental Health recently obtained. Two zones we'll be visiting today is Wilson Middle School area, as well as Tingley Beach and the Rio Grande. So as you can see, we do have a heat characteristic that is just broken out into the municipal boundaries that is the city. Blue represents about 90 degrees, and as we go into yellow, red, and darker red, we end up at 105 degrees. So we can really see those heat characteristics of July 9th of 2021. If we zoom into Wilson Middle School area, we can see it right here by this, the star. We can start seeing the heat profile characteristics of this part of town. We have the ability of overlaying tree canopy cover data, so that's those dark green blobs. This is actually looking at what is tree canopy at a 60 centimeter resolution, and this is information from the Nature Conservancy. Every pink dot in here is actually a project that's been happening. It's Albuquerque Neighborhoods with Tree New Mexico is actively planting these trees. And what's cool about each one of these hard-earned dots is that they are a geo data point of a tree that we can monitor over time. So we can see as we're putting in these trees, we can see how their health improves, what conditions we arise, and be able to make in-action management plans to shift as we see data come in. The green dots are city parks and other city properties. We have the same type of data of an all-park survey that we've been doing, of getting a geo data point for every single tree within the park system, and we can also manage those trees and the park canopy as well. And then blue dots represent potential tree planting, so the ability of planning for the future, especially maybe some plantings around Wilson Middle School. We'll snap over to Tingley Beach in Rio Grande area. We'll be a little bit later this afternoon, represented here by the star. We can really see this characterization of what is around 90 degrees transitioning into high 90s and in the hundreds as we go into the downtown area. This differential really is contributed to the bosque. And as you can see here, that dark green represents the canopy, a very thick canopy that is the Rio Grande Bosque. What's very cool about this data is as we've gotten high resolution data in from environmental health, we have seen that projects have been very active in areas we know to be hot. Now we can just see that better. So it's very commendable work of planting these trees. It takes interacting with a homeowner to have them plant a tree in their yard. So it's a very hard-earned data point to get. And we had the opportunity of applying data to our communication ability. So part of that is launching letsplantalbuquerque.org, where we are striving for our 100,000 tree goal by the end of the decade, by 2030. This is an avenue where people from Albuquerque can come and take the pledge to plant. If they're interested in planting a tree, take the pledge. We can directly communicate with those people, give them advice on where to plant a tree, which tree we would like them to plant, and then tell us about it so we can start building that canopy at a point-by-point data set. We're currently at 11,000 trees, and we're hoping to, as we communicate with the public and really get that word out, see this number uptick and be able to progress to our goal and see how we're getting there. It's also an alliance and a partnership with many other tree players that are doing excellent work within the city boundaries. With this is just another layer of data that we're using to look at the urban canopy. So areas we know to be lower canopy and higher heat, we have the ability of marketing directly to those areas more consistently, letting them know what is Plant Albuquerque, how to find resources, how to plant trees, all this information to really get a community buy-in. It also shows really cool information of by zip code, where are we seeing the most impressions, how many of those impressions are turning into clicks, how long they're on a website, and then how many pledges are coming in. So it really allows us to see how we're communicating, how we can shift that communication to really increase the urban canopy at a citizen level. And then finally, really coming into community engagement, project implementation, and overall stewardship of the urban canopy. So really, we're going to continue projects that have been doing really well. Incredible work by Tree New Mexico in partnership with the city of Albuquerque on the Neighborhoods program. Really continuing the work that local water utility has been doing for the past decade of providing rebates to offset the cost of a tree, offset the cost of irrigation material for that tree, as well as really upping our communication so we can have a community level planting, planting, and growing, and really everyone can be a steward of our urban canopy. If we go ahead and hit escape, we have this opportunity to really engage the public, and that's where we want this partnership to come from. Is all this data can be interactive, and people can see where they live, what is the percent canopy they currently are experiencing, how much plantable space is there, and play with this type of information, see what the city looks like if I filter down where our lowest canopy zones are, if I go into a planning aspect. And this is really one of those things where people can see the information we're working with and see the realities of their local neighborhood or their local street. It really bolster that community buy-in to improve the overall urban canopy and expand our green space from neighborhood to neighborhood. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that overview. Now, of course, a very important component of this entire story with heat and its impact on residents is, of course, public health. To shed some light on the public health implications of rising heat, I'd like to introduce Heidi Kraffel, the Deputy Division Director of Programs for the Epidemiology and Response Division at New Mexico Department of Health.
Thanks so much for inviting me. So you've just heard a little bit about how you can reduce temperatures by planting trees, for example. I just want to step back just a little bit, talk a little bit about public health impacts of climate change, focusing in this case on heat. But first I want to share with you some conclusions that were made in a report by The Lancet, which is a highly respected medical journal. And they concluded that climate change threatens to undermine the past 50 years of gains in public health. On the other hand, a comprehensive response to climate change could also be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. I think it's important to keep both of those points in your mind at the same time, the severity of it, but also the opportunity. And it looks like that is exactly what the city of Albuquerque is doing. So projections show that the temperature is going to increase in New Mexico regardless of the emissions scenario. We're going to try to do our best as a state to keep those emissions low, but we're still going to have increase in temperatures. So given that, there's going to be an increase in extreme heat events, and then also the duration and the intensity. And so there's going to be longer heat seasons. To illustrate this, we also have health data. So for example, between 2008 and 2020, when you look at emergency room visits specifically for heat stress in New Mexico, there's been a 72% increase in emergency department visits for heat stress in New Mexico as a state overall. If you look at it by region, so just geographical regions of the state, the most rapid increase in heat stress emergency department visits are first by the southwest region of the state, the southeast, and then the metropolitan region, so including Albuquerque. But overall, the southeast part of the state has the highest rates overall of emergency room visits for heat stress. So the other thing that we're also seeing is that we're seeing these emergency visits for heat stress earlier in the season and then also lasting later. So the offsetting effects of monsoons in the past would kind of decrease those heat visits to the emergency room. Now we're seeing that later on through July. So, and that's just one particular public health outcome associated with climate change. So you've been talking about fires, and of course that's another thing. With drought, more wind, less rainfall, you get hotter, drier, windier days. We're getting more forest fires, more acreage of fires as we go. And with that, you get particulate matter, very fine particulate matter in the air. That can exacerbate respiratory conditions that people have, and it can also, for those at risk for cardiovascular disease, it can increase the risk for heart attack. So those are some of the other public health outcomes. And finally, I think one thing that really needs to be stated is the mental health outcomes associated with that. And, you know, everyone here understands about the wildfires that are happening in New Mexico right now, how many fires there are, how much acreage there are. And when you think about the people who either are getting ready to evacuate, or maybe have already evacuated, and just the mental health impact on that, the anxiety about that, the stress about that, it's important to consider that as well. So given all of this, really we need to have the resources for the communities and populations that are increased risk for health impacts of climate change. And part of this includes implementing strategies to reduce harm and prevent adverse health outcomes. And so that's such as adaptation, being able to give people the resources they need if they don't have an air conditioner, if they don't have a swamp cooler. How are we going to provide spaces for those people in order for them to stay cool on these extremely hot days? And of course, that's just one example. Well, thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And finally, I'd like to introduce Admiral Rachel Levine to share her perspective on these important issues.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Mayor, for the fantastic briefing by you and your staff, and the work that you are doing in terms of the impacts of climate change, and particularly the impacts of climate change on health. So we recognize that in the Biden-Harris administration and with our Secretary Becerra, and we are at the Department of Health and Human Services particularly looking at the health impacts of climate change, and that's a little bit new to the table. And so we have a new office of climate change and health equity that just started in September of 2021 to look at exactly what you are looking at in Albuquerque and in New Mexico, the health impacts of climate change. And as you were discussing, you know, we kept thinking of these health impacts as an existential crisis, which somehow implies that it's something in the future. But as you are seeing, this is right now. We are seeing the impacts of climate change right now, and you're seeing it right now in New Mexico and in Albuquerque with the heat emergencies that you're talking about, with the fires and the smoke. And so I really liked how you kind of laid out the physical issues, the physical challenges that you see in Albuquerque, but also the mental health challenges from the stress of that on people, obviously still dealing with very stressful circumstances with the pandemic and other the mental health issues and other things that we're seeing. I love the concepts of adaptation and resilience, and that's exactly what we're looking to do through the federal government. So at our office of the Assistant Secretary for Health and our new office of OCHI, we're the conveners. So we're pulling together the CDC, the NIH at HHS. We're working closely with the Environmental Protection Agency and others. There is a heat special working group throughout the administration working on heat. And of course, we work with NOAA and others in a very collaborative fashion, trying to look at all the impacts of all of those issues, and from our perspective, the health impacts, and how to adapt and how to develop that resilience that you are speaking about. I love how you talked about science, communication, and community engagement. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We have the science, so our experts at the CDC, our experts at NIH, at EPA, et cetera, give us the science. We're working on the communication aspect and that community engagement with, for example, with you all, but then actually collaboration with the whole federal government and a whole of government approach looking at these issues. You know, you had mentioned the skiing. I was here 30 years ago, long time ago, and I remember being here in the winter, and you could ski all winter, and I have skied on your slopes, and so it's so disturbing to me having those great memories that that is threatened, and that's you know, I'm sure that threatens your economy and it threatens the tourism, etc. So we're in seeing these impacts now, and we all have to work together. We are stewards, as you said. We are stewards of our environment, and we have to work together to decrease greenhouse gas emissions and work together to mitigate and develop resilience to these health impacts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Admiral Levine. Now, and thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. We're going to now proceed to Q&A.
We can take any questions, and we'll kind of direct them up here. Any questions for media?
Chihuahuan Desert, not Sonoran Desert. I was really checking me on that. All right, great.
I think we can wrap up then. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone.
With the launch of our new name, the Department of Arts and Culture, we reflected on the things we collect and hold on behalf of the people of this city. Plants and animals, fish and insects, books and media, artwork and history, photos and manuscripts.